You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Every medium has its own distinctive way of communicating ideas and evoking emotions. The poet crafts words into images and metaphors that tickle the imagination. The film producer massages moving collages of color to stir sadness, fear, and whatever other emotion. The museum curator, the people who create museum exhibits, work with objects, which they call artifacts. A powerful Picasso can inspire wonder. A 10,000-year-old spear point can silently connect us to ancestors whose names we can never know. Museums are judged by many criteria, but the first is the quality of the artifact collection. And the search for new artifacts never stops for a museum. The proposed National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, which started in 1994 with no artifacts, is searching for objects to tell its story. One of the artifacts they have identified is a two-story slave jail or pen, complete with iron bars on the windows and iron rings that might have been used to secure captives. In a not-so-unusual development, the proposal to dismantle this barn, move it to Cincinnati, and reassemble it in the Freedom Center on the new Cincinnati riverfront has stirred controversy. Some people argue that the barn ought to be left in Kentucky in its original location. Today, we explore the issue of the barn and the larger issues it presents. Before we start, I want to be clear that I have a conflict of interest here. From 1994 until 1996, I served as the project manager for the Freedom Center, and since then did specific assignments on contract for the center, though I have not had any formal contact through contracts for about a year. Many of the people at the center, though, I remain in contact with. They're my friends and they're my professional colleagues. This morning, though, I am joined by two people. Alicestyne Turley-Adams works with the African American Heritage Commission of the Kentucky Heritage Council. She lives in West Bend in eastern Kentucky near Natural Bridge, where she operates her own consulting company, Yesteryear Research Unlimited. Ernest Britton is the Public Relations Director of the Freedom Center. Before joining the Freedom Center, Ernest worked in student affairs at Northern Kentucky University and as director of the Cincinnati Arts Consortium before that, where we first met. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning.
And
thank you.
Alicestyne, thank you. Want to make clear to people that you drove a long way this morning to be here, and I really do appreciate that. Let's start out by, we showed a few pictures there, but let's start out by talking a little bit about what this structure is. Could you describe its physical qualities? And while you're doing this, Alicestyne, we're going to bring up a little video to help people see. But how would you describe this?
I would describe this building as a very unique log structure, early American structure. We've had our architectural historians look at it. They say they've never seen anything like it. It's very well preserved for its age. And it is a very haunting and impressive building. It's
haunting.
Yes.
Ernest, haunting in a couple of ways. And I think what people may focus in on and what people may have just seen is on their screens, iron bars on the window, rings pinned in those huge log rafters that were the second floor. The second floor, the floorboards are missing. That's gone, but that's not unusual in an old building.
Right.
But those pins, is that what's really haunting about this?
Not just what's physical, but actually the spirit that's there. Carl Westmoreland, who's their external affairs officer and also a national expert on historic preservation, has described the comments of the workers on this farm as saying many of them will not go into the barn, into the slave prison, because the feeling is so intense there that it's a haunting feeling.
In fact, I was down there in September to shoot at inside the barn, inside the structure, with John Lomax, and John was saying that his son overheard him talking about this, and his son, who isn't particularly interested in academic issues, but this caught his attention instantly. So it does have a certain power beyond just the physical. One of the things that when I was there in September, I walk in and it raises a million questions in my
Yes.
mind. Being a historian, I'm skeptical of what people tell me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm skeptical that, oh, the oral tradition is what's really the true tradition. What is it that we can really know about this structure? What other sort of documents, what other ways can we try to document that this, one, was used to hold slaves, and two, how it was really used and how frequently it was used in that way?
This is part of the issue that is part of the controversy, in that it is such a new find, it is such a unique find, that we really have only just begun to discover what and how this building was used. The fact that it's in eastern Kentucky and a part of the state that we know had a very large African American slave population, in addition to a very large African American antebellum free population, that this structure has probably many stories to tell us. We know that the story of Eliza and her escape across the river, her daughter was held somewhere in this area, maybe in that slave pen. We're not certain. We don't know what type of archaeological information can be gained from the site. We don't know enough, and that's part of the whole issue.
Ernest, this barn, and I'm going to come back to this research
Yes.
question. What is the relationship right now between the person who owns the property that the slave pen sits on and the Freedom Center? Have you made a deal?
Well, a year ago, in fact, a year ago this month, the farmer who owns the land contacted the Freedom Center. He indicated that he had already offered the slave prison to a local historical society, and that no action had taken place, and that he was actually coming to the Freedom Center as a matter of last resort, that either he was going to tear it down or he was going to donate it to the Freedom Center to be a part of the museum. This past October, the Freedom Center accepted that donation. Its Board of Trustees acted to accept that donation.
Okay. In that period of time between, to go back to what Alicestyne was talking, what kind of research did the Freedom Center do, and what have you found out? How much do you really know about this structure?
Certainly, as soon as we discovered information about the slave pen, we sent our architectural team. Carl Westmoreland, who's the national preservation expert, he took the lead in going down to Mason County, gathering information, preparing the investigation. We've had an archaeologist from the South Carolina State Museum come in, and one of the reports that we have, one of the several reports that we have, indicates that it is a wooden slave pen and a very significant structure in terms of the representation of African American history in slavery in America. We also have a team of architectural preservationists who have been working on that process to document and prepare for dismantling.
One of the questions here is, in my mind, is what sort of paper materials. I think as this has gotten reported in the newspapers, I think people may say, oh, this is how, and the way the people today, they use the term plantation owners, but the farm owner, because most structures, most institutions had very few slaves, one or two, but say, oh, well, the slaves were locked up every night. And really, that's not the way slavery normally operated. Right. What's your speculation about how this was used? And the fact that it's so close to Maysville and Washington, where there was a regular slave sale going on. What do you think this was used for? Allison?
Okay. We are thinking, we have theories,
okay,
that it was possibly used as a location to house escapes,
okay,
runaways, fugitives, because that was a very popular escape route out of Kentucky into Ohio.
And might point out that the Supreme Court of Kentucky in the 1840s said that it was almost impossible to hold slaves safely in any county along the Ohio River.
Right.
So escapes were very frequent.
And we know that this is not the only slave pen in that area, that the northern part of that county is dotted with many former slave pen locations. We know that there
Any others that exist?
There are
survive?
A couple that we suspect still
okay,
survive. We know that there were several slave catchers, very wealthy slave catchers who operated in the area. We know that it was part of a route that was used to transport slaves into the state and to the further region south. So
lots of, just again, point out that lots of movements of slaves from the upper South, from Virginia, and remember Virginia at that time included also what we call West Virginia, down the Ohio to the deeper South where slavery it was more economically efficient.
And that's an important part when you think in terms of this role, the role of this slave pen or slave prison in the whole process of moving African Americans into America, the transatlantic slave trade, moving them here from the East Coast through Ohio, through Pennsylvania, into Kentucky, and using this as sort of a stopping point on the way to plantations throughout the South.
Okay, let me ask the next question, and again, our viewers will be able to see a little bit of video. Describe the location, Alicestyne. Where is this?
it is, for Kentucky, for anyone who ever knows, has been in the state, it's in a remote, eastern Kentucky is probably the remote parts of the state. And it sits by itself in the middle of a field, which in itself is the part of the haunting part of it. And it's in Upper Mason County. It's, you know,
about 5 miles from Maysville. It's up out of the river valley and up in this field, and the viewers are going to be able to see it now. Ernest, one of the issues that has been raised is that, and Alicestyne just put it this way, where it is, its location, its original location, speaks to something about this, the function, the meaning, the significance of this. What would the Freedom Center do? What does the Freedom Center plan to do with this structure?
Well, you know, first of all, one of the things that John Fleming, who is our director of the museum and the former director of the National Afro-American Museum, has emphasized that preservation in the original location is always the first priority. And when possible, that will be something that the Freedom Center would support and advocate, and has done that with other projects around the country. But in this particular situation, the issue was either lose it to history, lose this piece of history because it would be torn down, or to assist in relocating it. The Freedom Center will put this in a prominent place in the middle of the museum.
So it'll be
so
inside.
that it will be a part of the telling the whole story. It's not just telling the story of what would happen in the Cincinnati area or what would happen in the Kentucky region. It's really putting it in a broad context of the international slave trade.
Okay. Alicestyne, what do you think of that?
of course, I don't like the idea.
Why?
I don't like the idea for several reasons. Number one, we too are committed as a public official with the state of Kentucky. We are very committed to preserving
Let me just
history.
ask you to elaborate. The Kentucky Heritage Council is what?
The Kentucky Heritage Council is the office responsible for state historic preservation for the state of Kentucky. And as such, we're charged with the responsibility of protecting historic properties for our state. And in that quest to do so and to preserve history in as close to its original content as we can, we understand that private ownership of property can create special problems. However, in 1994, when I undertook the research of historic sites in Kentucky, one of the places, to use an example, the John Parker home in southern Ohio in Ripley, was in terrible repair. And no one was interested in that property. It was literally falling down. And it was because of our commitment to the preservation of history that we did not undertake means to move the property from Ripley. We contacted persons in Ripley to help restore it.
But what about the situation in with this barn that the owner, well, two things. One, the owner says it's going to fall down, whatever, he's contacted you. Secondly, it does sit in the middle of the field on private property. Will anybody have access to it if it stays there, even if it is preserved? What about the access and it being able to be used in museum language as an artifact to tell that story?
Well,
what will be its impact?
What would be its impact is that I think that it would tell, we have other areas in Mason County near that site that have been offered if the state wanted to, or even if the Freedom Center wanted to relocate the slave pen to that location. I think it would still give you a sense of the area from where this
So
building
your
was
point
taken.
is that it may have to be moved off its current site but stay in Kentucky in its original county or its original
Yes.
region.
Yes. And actually, it could replace a slave pen that we know a certain location where another slave pen was located, that we could put that same structure.
Ernest, will the Freedom Center explore that as an option?
The Freedom Center really believes that Mason County has a great deal of history that is uncovered. And the Freedom Center will continue to work with any historians or residents in uncovering and telling that important story. But we are emphasizing that this is a piece of American history and not just Kentucky history. And we've worked to rescue that piece of history, and it will be in the museum at the Freedom Center for hundreds of thousands of people to visit every year. Blacks, whites, visiting together from all around the country. And as a result of those visits to the Freedom Center and seeing that slave pen there, we expect that people will visit Ripley and the John Parker
We're going to
House
come back to
and
those.
Mason.
We're going to come back to those sorts of issues because those are the bigger issues that this stands for. Hold on just a second. Stay tuned. After the break, we'll explore those broader issues of significance about the slave prison. Welcome back. Ernest, you just said that the way the Freedom Center is going to work is to help publicize small historic Underground Railroad sites and all those sorts of things, and not threaten them. Alicestyne, what are you hearing out in the field from places that, and there are communities all over the United States that have worked for decades to preserve their Underground Railroad sites.
Yes.
Some of them not real, but that's another question. Yes. But what are you hearing out there?
Well, most people are terribly frightened, I think. From the people that are contacting us in Kentucky, they sort of see this as almost a test case.
When you say this, you mean the Freedom Center?
The Freedom Center. What's happening here in Cincinnati with the Freedom Center and their desire to capture artifacts for their new museum, what that is doing to destabilize historic sites that they have in their communities. Virginia, Indiana, who have concerns of sites that they have, wanting to know how vulnerable will they be to having important properties taken from their state. And we have to understand that this is an enterprise. A private museum, collections are needed, everyone understands that, but to go back to the point that Ernest was making about wanting to promote it to a larger community, Kentucky is not that remote. We're right across the river from Cincinnati. We have lots of Cincinnati traffic that comes that way. They love the Kentucky side of the river for the quality of life that you do get in the community. And Mason County is very concerned about how this is going to affect their tourism dollars.
Yeah, I was born in northern Kentucky, and you're right, and grew up in northern Kentucky, but that river can be very wide too. But that's another question. Okay, Ernest, what about that? You know, I know that from the beginning, there has been a lot of concern about a great big interpretive center in one place.
Right.
How do you answer that?
There's a real need in the United States for a single place to tell the larger story of the Underground Railroad, to tell the story of American slavery and freedom. That kind of idea has been told by poets such as Maya Angelou and others for years and years. And in fact, Maya Angelou indicated that the reason that she wrote the book Beloved was because there was a need for such a place. And by the way, Maya Angelou was one of our honorary chairs for our national fundraising campaign. The important thing in all of this is that the Freedom Center really has concentrated on collecting stories. We want to tell the stories of the Underground Railroad and emphasize the lessons that come out of that.
What about artifacts? What about taking artifacts away?
Artifacts have only been a small part of that. You know, we are not as interested in artifacts as in stories. We can use duplicates, we can create things, but where we have stepped up and been involved with artifacts is when someone from a community has contacted us. Recently in Bellefontaine, Ohio, there was a group of school children who were working to move a schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse that was part of the Underground Railroad, but that was built specifically for the education of young black children, those escaping on the Underground Railroad and those living in the area. And it was the Freedom Center who was contacted about being a part of that restoration effort. We'll continue to reach out to people who reach out to us because that's the spirit of cooperation and collaboration.
I'm very aware of time. Alicestyne, what is legitimate? Is it legitimate for the Freedom Center to collect some artifacts and not others? What is permissible here in your eyes?
Well, when you speak to me about artifacts, I think of something that's transportable, that's movable. Slave chains are artifacts.
Well, in the museum world, I mean,
a building,
yeah,
a building as an artifact.
Yeah.
All right.
Greenfield Village is filled with
buildings.
structures. Yeah.
However, I would think that in a place that is so near to Cincinnati, and in this interest of preserving history.
Yeah. Okay. But what would be
an artifact
that's legitimate to collect? What about Bell Fountain? Is that okay, but not in Kentucky? What about, I don't know, whatever, letters, manacles?
Certainly all of those things are important. I am saying that when it comes to taking a particular property, Ms. Ernest is mentioning being contacted. Had we been contacted at the state of Kentucky and been given an opportunity to participate, that's one thing. And I don't want to confuse private interest with public interest. I think that's an important point to make here, that we're not in this because we have an $80 million structure going up that we need to fill with artifacts. We're more interested in the southern part of the story, which has yet to be told, that we have limited information in the South. So when we do get something like this and it's taken from us, it's a major loss.
Okay. Is the question here too, and I'm going to push the point here a little bit, because here in Cincinnati, we have heard about the Freedom Center on the front page of the Enquirer because the publisher is the co-chair, and we've gotten great, and we've heard very positive things regularly. I'm going to push this a little bit. Besides just big, small, besides just big, Ohio, Kentucky, is this the right place? Is there also a question about this organization that needs to be heard that maybe Cincinnatians aren't hearing about?
I believe so. I believe if you're talking to the grassroots people, they do not see Cincinnati at the Freedom Center as this wonderful contribution.
Why not?
Because of how the story has been preserved over the years. This story would not even exist now if it were not for the grassroots people who had protected it in their attics and basements. And when they're coming forward now with their stories and being pushed aside and saying that we have no part in the story now, that now it gets to be a corporate enterprise that people can now come to see in Cincinnati. What about Oberlin? What about Berea? What about all the other places?
Okay, I'm very aware of time. What about all those things? Corporate enterprise overlooking all the people who have saved it over the years.
You know, we are incredibly proud of the fact that the supporters of the Freedom Center and its development in telling an American story are from the corporate community, from the public community, and are from the grassroots community. And our partnerships with grassroots communities and organizations in Trumbull County, in Bell Fountain, in Ripley, Ohio, and across the nation in Connecticut and in Mexico, that's an important part of telling the story, an important part of our partnership. So these grassroots organizations are a part of the network.
Okay, I'm going to push this even further because I know I hear lots of things. When you use corporate, are we talking about, oh, this is controlled by big business, and I'll be just blunt about it, is this too much a white organization? Is that what's being said out there?
That is part of the problem.
Okay, let's get it out on the table.
That this is an issue that African Americans feel that once again their history is being commodified, that they no longer have a true part in it and how it's going to be told. And that all goes back to who's telling the story. Now, the Freedom Center, I realize, has African Americans working on the project. But how much control do African Americans actually have?
We have almost less than 30 seconds. What about that?
Our director of the museum was the founding director of the National Afro-American Museum. Our director of public programs, Dr. Mack, who is also an African American scholar, in particular, East African scholarship, has worked with African American organizations around the country, and Maya Angelou, to use a name that most people in the African American community know, would not have signed on to this project if it weren't telling the true story.
Okay. I have to wrap this up. I guess my hope would be that somehow people get together and find out who the people are on both sides of this. And because it's a big enterprise. Something's going to happen. So
something is happening.
Hope that this just continues. Thank you very much. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men who are shaping our city for the future. Have a good week.